New York City's heartbeat, the crossroads of the world, a place where history and modernity collide in a dazzling explosion of lights. But what if I told you that behind the glowing billboards and relentless crowds, Times Square wasn't always the iconic spectacle you know today? In fact, this global landmark has a rich and sometimes gritty past that could surprise you. From its birth as a quiet neighborhood to becoming a cultural, political, and commercial epicenter, Times Square has witnessed history in the making, and in some ways, even helped shape it. Our story begins in the late 19th century. Long before the flashing lights and the throngs of tourists, the area now known as Times Square was just farmland, a quiet part of Manhattan. In fact, Times Square was once part of the former farmland of the Lenape Native Americans. But in the mid-1600s, when Dutch settlers arrived, they cleared the land and established what was originally a part of the colonial farmsteads. By the 1800s, the land began to develop rapidly, with the construction of new streets and buildings. It wasn't until 1904, however, that Times Square came into the public eye in a way that would define it for generations. Before it was known as Times Square, this area was called Longacre Square. The name was derived from Long Acre, an area in London known for its carriage trade. In the early 1900s, it was a neighborhood that was seeing rapid development, mainly due to the construction of the elevated railroad system, which helped increase accessibility. The area was busy, but it wasn't yet the global icon we know today. In 1904, everything changed. The New York Times, one of the city's most influential newspapers, decided to move its headquarters to a new building at the corner of Broadway and 7th Avenue. To celebrate the paper's move, the building's owner, Adolph Ochs, ordered the construction of a massive electric sign, the first of its kind, to advertise the paper. This was the moment that began the transformation of Longacre Square into Times Square. The sign not only marked the building's grand opening, but it also symbolized a new era of commercialization and spectacle that would become synonymous with the square as the 1910s rolled in. Times Square began its golden age. It became the hub of New York's entertainment district, drawing crowds from all over the world. Broadway theaters began to dominate the area, with names like the Lyceum and the New Amsterdam Theater becoming landmarks for theatergoers. Times Square became synonymous with the American theater and the Great White Way, thanks to its endless neon lights. By the 1920s, Times Square was a cultural epicenter. It wasn't just about theater anymore. The area became home to restaurants, speakeasies, jazz clubs, and nightclubs. The lights of Times Square became brighter and more spectacular, symbolizing the excess and extravagance of the Roaring Twenties. However, the bright lights of Times Square didn't shine forever. The Great Depression hit in the early 1930s, and the area, like much of New York City, began to suffer. Theaters closed, businesses shuttered, and unemployment soared. The cultural vibrancy of Times Square dimmed as the city struggled to cope with the economic fallout. Despite this, Times Square would become a symbol of resilience during World War II. In the 1940s, the square once again became the site of national attention. When the news of D-Day broke, crowds gathered in Times Square to celebrate the Allied victory. And of course, it was here, in 1945, where an iconic image was captured. The famous photograph of a sailor kissing a nurse in Times Square, symbolizing the end of the war and the beginning of a new era. The 1960s and 1970s saw a stark transformation in Times Square. Times Square became dangerous. The once glamorous district became a symbol of urban blight. It was no longer a place you visited to see a Broadway play or a movie. It was a place where tourists feared to tread and locals avoided at night. By the 1990s, things began to change once again. Today, Times Square is one of the most visited places on Earth, drawing over 50 million visitors annually. It's a modern symbol of New York City's energy, ambition, and resilience. The massive electronic billboards, the flashing lights, the street performers, and the overwhelming flow of people make it a true spectacle. From its quiet origins as farmland to becoming the neon-lit symbol of New York City, Times Square has been witness to more than a century of change. It is a place of dreams and nightmares, of economic booms and busts, of cultural revolutions and global celebrations. Times Square isn't just a place, It's a piece of history, one that continues to evolve, pulse, and shine brightly at the crossroads of the world.